We're live. This Scrutiny Committee meeting is being conducted remotely in accordance with the coronavirus regulations and the remote meetings protocol agreed by the Council, which will operate alongside the Council's standing orders to ensure that we continue to take democratic decisions in an open and transparent manner. I would like to remind members that this meeting is being live streamed to the public. Can I request that you all switch off your cameras and mute your microphones when you're not speaking to ensure that there is no unnecessary background noise and to help with the audio and visual quality of the broadcast? The Council standing orders and code of conduct will apply at all times during this virtual meeting in the same way as ordinary meetings, and members should conduct themselves accordingly. Can I also remind members to ensure their chat function is switched on and to use the facility to indicate to the chair when they wish to speak on a particular item? And please do not speak until the chair invites you to do so. And for the benefit of everyone watching on the live stream, when the chair invites the members to cast their votes on any particular item, they will do so electronically using the voting facility in the chat function. As well as being broadcast live, a recorded version of the remote meeting will be uploaded onto the Council website for public viewing as soon as possible after the meeting, whilst translations of the proceedings can also be provided by request. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the Council. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Neil, for that introduction. Right, if I'm acting chairman of today's meeting, so to kick off, item 1 is apologies. Are there any apologies, Neil, please?
Apologies for this meeting, Chair, are Councillor Chris Evans, Councillor Mark Whitcutt, Councillor Graham Berry and Councillor Ibrahim Hayat. Okay,
thank you very much. And the next item on the agenda is item 2, declarations of interest. Those committee members who are present, any declarations, please? No. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda are the minutes of the previous meeting held on 2 meetings, 7th of June 2021 and the 21st of June 2021. And they're on pages 3 to 18 of your paperwork. So in the first instance, the minutes of the meeting on the 7th of June, in the first instance for accuracy, would somebody who was present at that meeting propose that a true record, please?
Yeah, I move to.
Yeah, thank you very much. We all agree on that. Thank you for your help there. Then the next item of the minutes of the meeting on the 21st of June. For accuracy first.
Yeah, I move to.
I can't comment. I wasn't there, Chairman.
Well, I was, so I'll second. Okay. So all agreed that they're correct record?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Then we move to item 4 on the agenda, staff support during COVID, pages 19 to 32. And do I hand over there, Neil, to an officer, please?
Yes, please, Chair. Today we got Rhys Cornwall and Rachel Davis.
Okay, well, welcome Rhys and welcome Rachel to this scrutiny committee. And over to you.
Hello, Chair, hello, committee. I'm going to give, Chair, if it's okay, I'm going to give a general brief introduction to this, and then I'm going to hand over to Rachel, our HR manager, who can go through some more of the detail. Then we're happy to take any questions and try to provide any answers as best we can. Okay, so we brought this paper to committee, basically looking at essentially a response to staffing, health and safety and well-being during the course of the pandemic. So there's some background information in the report detailing where we were prior to March 2020, and then a series of sections in the report then which look at the general actions we've undertaken, focus on health and safety, and the work that was done around there, learning and development, moving into employee communications and support for well-being, etc., and how we dealt with those things during the course of the pandemic. There's a section there around absence and the impact on staff absences, and we'll probably need to provide a bit more information as part of that conversation for that section. And then finally, some future developments, because obviously I think most organisations have been operated in this COVID world, where particularly an organisation like Newport City Council, which has staff both working remotely and staff working in the front line, some lessons learned about how we have covered those things. So that's my kind of general introduction, Chair. If okay with you, I'd like to hand over to Rachel then, who can perhaps pick up some of the detail in each of those sections.
Okay, welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. I'll go through some of the information in the report which you have here around what we've done to try and support the workforce. And yes, very happy to take your questions afterwards, and if there's some more detail that you want around any of these areas, hopefully I'll be able to answer that for you or find that information out. So the report goes into some detail around what did we do immediately when lockdown first came about in March 2020 to recognise that pressures on the workforce, both from their working perspective, but also, and more importantly, from their home life perspective, what we could do to support. And the first thing that we tried to do was put out as much communication as possible, because if you don't have information advising you and guiding you, telling you how we will support you, then there's a vacuum in which people are not sure how they're operating or what their employer is going to do to be there for them and understand the difficulties that they were about to face. So the first few things that we introduced were some new changes to our HR payroll system in terms of how we recorded people who needed to self-isolate, who had perhaps family members who needed to self-isolate and therefore they couldn't come to work, and also categories for those staff who sadly contracted COVID. And we have had a number of staff throughout the pandemic who have tested positive, who have been poorly, in some very few cases, fortunately, have been hospitalised, and we also have a small number who have suffered from long COVID as well. So it's been quite far-reaching in terms of the different situations that staff may have been in throughout the period from March 2020. So in addition to the communication and changing the way that we categorised absence on the system so that we would be able to make decisions on staffing resources quite quickly, knowing how many people were potentially off in any area at any time, our Gold Command Group were our port of call for making very quick decisions on how can we change things to support staff. So we had to look at how we were able to respond to flexibility for staff to have support with childcare at home when the schools closed. The juggling act of home learning as well as trying to work was extremely challenging for a lot of staff to be able to do. And we knew that our responsibilities under the health and safety legislation that we were required to operate were really, really important. So another quick thing we did was look at how can we get DSE assessments done and how can we get staff to have equipment that they need if they have to work from home, they don't work on a site where they need to continue coming in. And those first emergency response situations, I suppose, happened very quickly back in March. And since then, we've tried to continue reviewing each of those areas. How can we improve it further? What's missing? What's needed? And we've tried to talk to our staff around what they feel they need as well. So 3.2 in the report talks quite a lot around what our health and safety team have done. They have been inundated, as you would probably expect, since the start of the pandemic. And lots of their time has been taken up entirely with COVID related issues, particularly around areas where there's been requirements for risk assessments in high risk areas. So that would be in our city services department, clearly in our social care and also in school settings as well, where guidance has changed over the course of the last 18 months. And we've always had to be upfront in making sure that we're knowing what we're advising our managers to do to protect staff and the public as far as possible. In terms of what the health and safety team have also tried to do since the beginning of the pandemic in responding to not only risk assessments, they've been working on an ongoing piece of work around understanding how mental well-being can be supported, because we have seen an increased number of stress-related risk assessment requests come through or well-being referrals come through, and Those have increased over the last 6 months, probably more so than at the beginning of the pandemic. And the health and safety team are trying to juggle the proactive work that they can do around supporting people who are clearly feeling pressures, alongside the very reactive work that is still ongoing. In terms of the learning and development that we've put in, all of our training stopped back in March 2020, and the immediate response was, well, face-to-face training can't happen, so the programme came to pretty much an abrupt end. And it took quite a few months for our providers that we procure to transform their learning and development offer from a face-to-face course to an online or an e-learning option, in order for us to be able to continue to provide that upskilling that the workforce need. We were very mindful that we couldn't just have an ongoing situation from the autumn of 2020 onwards, whereby learning and development wasn't taking place at all. So we looked to repurpose all of our training provision, and that has all been done. The learning and development directory that we offered prior to COVID is now all fully up and running in a remote way. And the only face-to-face courses that we have been able to put on have been first aid, which has been an absolute requirement. There's no way around doing first aid refresher training other than face-to-face. That has been done in a very COVID secure way in the Civic Centre. And we're confident that the learning and development programme has been appropriately adapted to be able to meet the need that the workforce have and that managers need, whilst also being able to operate within a COVID environment. And hopefully we will be able to return to some face-to-face training in the not so distant future. One of the new things that we put on, and it was as a direct result of the feedback that we had from managers and employees alike, was that they were struggling to understand the challenges of remote working versus in an office environment. So we identified a solution for that, and it's been one of our most popular requests for training. There's a wait list for it, which is called Maximising Success and Productivity and the Challenges Around Remote Working. So this enables people to understand how they can re-energise, be motivated at home, avoid being distracted, prioritise properly, stay connected with others. All areas where, and I'll come on to talk about communication in a minute, employees have said that they feel that they've needed extra support in. So by us identifying some online remote opportunities for people, we've been able to try and plug that gap and provide a solution to the demand that our staff are telling us that they have. Obviously, we've continued to try and deliver all of our mandatory training. We haven't wanted to stop offering things like dementia friends awareness or anti-slavery, human trafficking training. So all of those programmes have continued, and we are about to roll out a council-wide equality and diversity training opportunity, starting with inclusive leadership for managers and eventually rolling out across the whole workforce. And we're not letting the COVID situation preclude us from moving forward with that. I mentioned communications a moment ago. We've sent out many surveys over the last 18 months. Every month there was a different themed survey. We initially started looking at well-being every month. That then reduced down to every 2 months, because you have to be careful with survey overload for people who are juggling an awful lot of things. And we did notice a decline in response rates to surveys as the pandemic continued. So we did have to be careful about what kind of questions we were continuously asking people to keep getting engaged responses back from them. But you'll see in the report that there's a couple of graphs there, and that is on 3.4 under employee communications, if you have it in front of you. And you can see there from that graph, we asked people to rate their overall feelings around their mood and mental well-being on a positive to negative sliding scale. And while September of 2020 looks very positive, significant amount of people felt that their mood and well-being was on the positive side. That's possibly as a result of schools going back and home learning coming to an end. That did enable people to feel far more able to cope with juggling the work and the home life. But we've tried to keep a rolling programme of surveys going throughout the pandemic to ask people, are you feeling okay? Is there anything you need? What can your employer do for you? We've also separately surveyed managers to get their views and responses on the challenges that they're finding managing their workforce. And that's both people working from home, but also very importantly, people who are working on site as well, who have had additional challenges trying to maintain appropriate risk assessment adherence, particularly with PPE in some of our frontline areas, whilst having gaps in staffing resources whilst people are not in work, has been incredibly challenging for them. So we have also, as I say, separately surveyed our managers to say that we're also listening to you as a group as well. We have a dedicated COVID-19 page on the intranet. If you have access, you haven't had a look, please feel free to. Every update that comes there, whether that's an organisational update, whether that's a change to guidance that Welsh Government give out that's relevant to us as a workforce, we'll make sure that we get those updates on that page so that everybody can find the latest information and communication without having to search back through emails. And we've also continued throughout the pandemic to send our fortnightly staff newsletter. This goes out in 2 different ways. It gets sent to your newport.gov.uk email address for those who have a network access, and it also gets sent to personal email accounts for people who have registered a personal email address with us on the HR payroll system. So people who don't routinely use a computer for part of their role are still able to access the same staff communications, which we think is so important for those people to feel in touch with the rest of the organisation. And we ensure that in every staff newsletter that goes out, there is always a section on wellbeing and support. And again, in the report, there's a couple of there's a slide in there or a picture in there that shows you an example of the kind of information that we make sure that we put out in the newsletters. Reece mentioned earlier absence, and there are some statistics in this report that show that general absence that's not COVID related has been significantly less since the pandemic started, but we obviously have had a lot of staff who have had to self-isolate, unfortunately, and a much smaller number of staff who have tested positive and needed to have some time off work because of that. So in order to support staff who have needed to be off, whether that's COVID related or whether that's for an entirely different reason, we have advised and guided managers on how to be as supportive as you possibly can, and how to ensure that the management of attendance policy, whilst very important in normal times, may need to have an additional element of flexibility in it due to the circumstances that we are in. And we have tried to, where needed, ensure that reasonable adjustments are put in place for anyone that needs it. And they might be because of a physical issue, or that might be because of a mental health issue. And we have tried to really, in the HR department, push managers on being as flexible and as accommodating as possible so that we can have contributions from staff in some way in work, rather than have people unwell at home. In terms of what we're looking to do next, there are a couple of key things. So we've been spending some time over the last year reviewing the management of attendance policy, as I mentioned a moment ago, and we're looking to modernise the way in which that we treat sickness absence and almost flip that to, instead of looking at historic absence that somebody has had, we want to look at how to prevent future absence by ensuring people are well in work. So we hope to be able to roll out a new programme on wellness at work later this year. And we've also wanted to work with partners to understand, well, what's happening regionally or nationally that we can be involved in and support. And we've been talking to colleagues around the Connect 5 programme, which is again mentioned in the report briefly, which is all about mental health and wellbeing. It's a training programme funded by the Health Board here and also by Welsh Government. And as a key partner in the region, we'll be looking to roll Connect 5 out in the council here, predominantly in social care to start with, and then we'll look to see how wide we can spread it after that. Because we understand that, you know, quality conversations about mental health and wellbeing is probably an area that our managers need some additional support and training on, and that Connect 5 programme is all about how to have those initial conversations and to then signpost people on to additional resources or support that they might need. And we'll also be looking to use their website. They have a website, mellow.cymru, and we'll be looking to use that as our primary mental health support signposting in our staff newsletters. I'm conscious that I've gone through that very quickly, but with a lot of words. So if you'd like to ask some questions now, then I'd be very happy to take them.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. Very good. Miqdad?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yes, it's a positive report, and it shows, you know, I mean, we were entering a situation none of us could even dream about at the beginning of 2020. And yet, you know, we had to sort of think about how we can deal with it. And the home working idea then was very novel and all that. I think my question is, Rachel, about the communication. You showed a couple of graphs, as you said, and they tell a good story in a way. And then you put few comments on the next page from people. What I'm interested to know really, what confidence can we have in those graphs? Because what's the sample of people that have actually responded? You know, to make us feel, well, you know, this is really our staff are telling us this, and our staff are saying, you know, their feeling of sort of well-being and safety in September last year was a lot higher than it was in April and that sort of thing. How can we really quantify the confidence we have in those results?
Sure, thank you for the question. We do get a wide range of responses to surveys. It can be as high as 700, 800 in a response, or it can be as low as 150. And we do see that people can get survey fatigue. So when you keep sending the same type of content out, you will tend to see, or we have seen, fewer responses each time you do that, that you have to mix it up and let it be something different and therefore more engaging, and people are more inclined to then respond, or we have to try and then link it back to something that will directly affect them. So I would say the lowest response was probably about 150, 160, and the highest was up to nearer 800. And they are on a sliding scale, but then it has come back up where we've changed the content. So we've got about 1,200, I think Reece will correct me if I'm wrong, about 1,200 staff that are not either in schools, for example, or in some frontline roles, people who are more likely to respond to surveys if you've got a computer that you're working at every day and the emails pop through and you see the request. So 800 out of 12 is excellent. 150 leaves a lot to be desired. But over the course of the time that we've sent the surveys out, you know, the average is probably about 450. So I think that's not that bad. An annual engagement survey that you would, in an industry standard, expect responses to be, they're generally about as low as 30%. So we can't capture the views of every single person if they don't complete the survey or are not engaged to do that. But we're always thinking of new ways to do things. So we've held focus groups. We've got our staff networks, which are obviously in their infancy, but will be a different angle for us to have voices back into the corporate centre from different parts of the organisation. And we know that there's more to do with people who are in frontline working roles.
If I could come back on that. So the first of those graphs on page 23, you know, the one which gives you sort of the mood and mental well-being. Yeah. So what were the number of responses for that graph?
That graph isn't showing a number of percentages because it's got 4 surveys on there. It's got the April, the May, the June and the September. So it doesn't have an overall number per se, but the average, like I say, is about can be about 400, 450 as an average across. Sometimes, like I say, it'd be very low, 150, sometimes it'll be 700. It varies as the months go by, but on an average, it's probably about 400, 450.
Okay, so that's about a third then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, could we then assume in this case that those who did not respond, we don't need to worry about? Can we assume that they were getting on, therefore did not see the point of the survey?
I think we wouldn't ever want to discount the views of people who don't respond. We should be asking ourselves, why are people not responding, and what can we do to encourage greater response? As I say, survey fatigue is one of the reasons. People think, well, I fill this in, I haven't changed, so therefore I don't feel the need to fill it in again. But I think it would be risky for us to almost discount what the views of people who haven't responded might be. We just need to think of other ways in which we can improve the reach of the surveys and get those responses back. And it might be that surveys are not the answer. We recently, in a new normal report, in a survey for New Normal, we have asked the workforce their views on the future, the medium to long-term future. And one of the questions we did ask them was, how do you want to receive communication from the organisation? Do you find the newsletters helpful? Do you find email helpful? Do you find surveys helpful? And so we're going to be looking at the results of what's come through on that particular survey to find out whether there are different things that we can do that people will engage with. So we're always looking at ways to try and get the people who don't respond to contribute, because actually the people who don't respond have probably a greater majority percentage of the workforce, but also we should be asking ourselves why they haven't responded and doing something about that.
Chair, I could come back if you like after, but I do have a couple more questions. So
you carry on. I don't think we've got a full committee, so you've got the microphone, Mick. You carry on.
Okay. Yeah, I think you anticipated the point. In hindsight, Rachel, because all I can say in hindsight, because we were dealing with, how many times have we said this, unprecedented situation. I wonder, as we are talking about the well-being, which include mental well-being, could we, for example, have done, like to encourage people to respond, other than in a survey, which a lot of people sort of, when they receive, they put aside, they might do it and then they forget about doing it, so it doesn't get done. Yeah, would you say it might have been a good idea that, HR can actually sort of have a forum of staff to sort of discuss this, to get some sort of verbal feedback over Zoom, obviously, or Teams. It would have been useful, for them to, for example, establish a forum like this to try and get sort of feedback and a cross section of opinion. You're muted.
You're on mute, Rachel.
I'm sorry. Reese might want to come in a moment, but I mentioned earlier about our networks, where we'd held some focus groups. We have an inclusive access staff network group, which is made up of people who have either a physical or mental impairment, who want to have their voice heard, and they have been really helpful and useful in us understanding what's happening with people who need additional support throughout the pandemic and what we can try and do. So they are met with on a regular basis, and if HR have a specific topic that we want to go and talk to them about, then we will go along and get those face-to-face views. Like you mentioned, we went to one in August around accessibility of the Civic Centre and the long-term plan for buildings and how staff can use them more easily if they have disability, for example. So we do have some face-to-face over Teams opportunities whereby we can talk to staff, but it is obviously far more challenging in terms of getting volume to have a representative number. 400 odd survey responses would be more representative than if we held smaller number of focus groups with perhaps 8 to 10 people, just purely because we are an organisation of 5,500. But face-to-face is obviously very important, and where we see an opportunity, we should grasp that.
Yeah. Any comment from sort of the trade unions on this report, on this sort of work you've been doing? Through your normal channel, has there been any observation from the trade unions about, and because I should think this is an issue that concern their members, their health, well-being, safety. So has there been an input from the trade unions on this?
Yes, Reese and I meet with Unison and GMB branch secretaries, regional officers regularly. We've had lots of dialogue throughout the course of the pandemic where we've talked about all sorts of issues related to staff wellbeing, whether that's a health and safety angle, whether that's a remuneration one. We frequently have contact with both of the corporate trade unions, I would say, and there's also then a separate forum whereby the teaching trade unions are able to meet with the Chief Education Officer in HR and health and safety reps to talk about school setting specific issues. So yes, we meet frequently with the trade unions, and if we were going to implement something new, then we would talk to them, brief them, get their views, and then go back to them with a response. So they're fully engaged, yes.
Okay.
If I make that, if I may, on that point, because that was one on my list, and if I can get rid of it now, if you wouldn't mind. I think that's an important point that Mick has made. I mean, we're not in normal circumstances situation, and obviously we know you've mentioned 5,500 staff. There's trade union representation. There's a normal process of communication between yourself and the unions. Some of the things you've mentioned in your report may lead to changes in working conditions for the better, perhaps. But I mean, as long as all that's done in the normal process, which is via the union, so to speak, I think that type of statement would be encouraging. We mustn't, just because of the times we're in, just ignore sort of protocols, groups, conditions, agreement. They still need to be controlled and correctly processed. It's not a question, is it really? That's a bit of a statement. It follows on from what Mick had asked you with respect.
We've also been, just to add to the response to that, I suppose, we've also maintained throughout COVID our employee partnership forums. So where we have our formal meetings with the trade unions around various terms and conditions, they're held quarterly, and we may have missed one because it might have been scheduled for April of 2020, but we've also held those forums every quarter consistently.
Okay, no, that's good news. Thank you. Reese, you've come back. Do you wish to speak, or?
Yeah, just a couple of points. I'll pick up the trade union one, if possible, before I forget that bit. So, you know, I think it's really important. Obviously, we've maintained a good working relationship with our trade unions before the pandemic and during the pandemic. And whilst we've had some pretty challenging conversations, you know, we've maintained that, as Rachel said. So obviously, particularly in the first few months of the pandemic, there was a lot of questions from trade unions around how we were operating and the change of that. So Rachel and I picked that up, I suppose, in order to ensure that they were sort of direct messaging back to the trade unions around any changes, any significant things that we were going to do, or conversations took place with the trade unions beforehand. So that all happened. And obviously in Wales, we also have joint council. So there's a kind of hierarchy of those discussions between the employer side and trade unions nationally, regionally, and then locally as well. So, you know, there've been some bumps on the road, but we've listened, we've spoken, we've been open and honest with each other, and you know, and I think that's been quite productive. I'm just going to go back to the Councillor Nawami's comments around the well-being side of it. I suppose just to add into that, the surveys around well-being are not the totality of the things we do about gauging the well-being of our workforce. Our HR business partners work very closely with service managers on a daily basis. So specific issues around well-being within staff members are picked up at that level. So, you know, we don't wait for a quarterly survey to go out to judge what's going on. And actually have quite a lot of feedback through around specific issues. And, you know, we've tried to, and I'm sure Rachel will add into this, we've tried to be pragmatic, you know, whilst maintaining health and safety requirements for our staff and service users, but being pragmatic about how we approach some of these things, because we park our school staff and those staff delivering frontline services. Of the up to 1,200 staff we've had working from home from any one time, each of those 1,200 staff have very different circumstances. So operationally, whilst you might have some approaches to this, you also have to maintain that pragmatism, because you have to adapt to people's individual circumstances and make sure you're actually taking some of those issues into account as well.
Okay. All right, Rhys, thank you very much for that. Before I ask if Rachel wants to come back in, Councillor Ferris, have you got any questions, please?
Yeah, no, where are we? See me face now. That's better. Okay, Chairman, I was as regards staff well-being. Tell me if I'm reading the report right, Rhys, that the levels of stress with people working at home are said to have fallen somewhat, as opposed to working sort of face to face in the old manner. Am I right in thinking that?
I'm certain Rachel will have a few things to say about this one, Councillor Ferris, but I think in relation to workplace stress and the stresses that some staff face from those interactions and relationships in a workplace, obviously that has reduced. So actually incidents of workplace stress had reduced as a result of people working from home. However, I think, and I said, I think Rachel will want to come back in. I think that has been replaced somewhat by other stresses. Right. So, you know, if you think of some of the care and responsibilities that, you know, staff have had to pick up, the period of homeschooling, you know, and this applies to all the workforce, so whether they were working at on the coalface, so to speak, or actually working from home or working remotely in some other way, you know, none of us really thought we were going to live through a global pandemic. So actually the stresses of that and what's happened to that, and Newport, if you remember, Newport was particularly badly hit in the first wave. And you know, and because of its, you know, it's a compact geographical area, we've got high density populations, you know, we've always been on the higher end for cases. If you look at the Public Health Wales data. So, you know, whilst a remarkable job is done in order to keep a lid on all of that and make sure we're dealing with the clusters as they arise, and the environmental health team and the contact tracing team in Newport have been immense in doing that. It's been incredibly stressful and challenging, I think, for everybody. You know, so I think there's been obviously a reduction in workplace stress, but it's been replaced by other things.
Yeah, plenty of other stresses to take its place. Yeah, thank you.
Is there any other questions, Charles?
Yeah, well, listening to Rachel's presentation, I thought, well, these are all, you know, well thought out strategies. You know, it seems to be on the ball in dealing with the situation. And I was tempted to ask about what other authorities were doing, but Rachel towards the end did say that you've got your connection with your regional colleagues. I suppose then, you know, you can sort of compare notes and work out, you know, new avenues of a strategy which would help. I'm assuming that's the case.
Lisa or Rachel? Rachel, do you wish to answer that?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Quite right, Councillor Ferris. Yes, we have regular contact with colleagues, not just in our local region, but also nationally. So Rhys and I will meet with other HR directors, HR managers, and we share that learning, that experience around what others are doing. The Connect 5 that I mentioned is a Gwent project or Gwent region project. So yes, we're always having conversations to find out what we can learn from others, which is totally appropriate, really, because we're all going through the same thing, and there will be other people who are doing things that are perhaps more innovative than we are. We might be doing things that might be a bit more innovative, so it's really important that we do share that learned experience.
Yeah, all good stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mick, do you wish to come back in on anything, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to future developments, section 4, what is it, page 26? I find the first paragraph really challenging to follow. It talks about a rebranding of a well-being offer, and then about, okay, the page tag, I suppose that must be a website of sort. Can you just clarify that, please? Because you are sort of earmarking it as one of your future development. The well-being offer, you say you're going to rebrand it. So can we have some clarification of what rebranding of a well-being offer? I mean, the whole thing really sounds to me quite mysterious here, you know?
Yes, no, happy to give some detail on that. At the moment, or pre-pandemic, we had some information around health and well-being on the intranet, and you had to really search through the pages to try and find where it might be. Nothing was easily signposted, and we might have some information over in the health and safety part, we might have some information over in the HR part, we'd have something else again going out in the staff newsletter, and there isn't one home for all of that information to stay, to make it easier for staff to understand where they go to find information. So where I mentioned earlier, we've got a learning and development brochure. It is a physical brochure. Okay, we don't print it, but it's like a magazine, turn it over, a bit like the staff newsletter, and all of our courses are in there. You can click on links for further information to find out if that's something you'd want to book on. We don't have a health and safety and wellbeing one. So we want to put together a brochure, if you will, whereby all of our health and safety training will be in there, all of our wellbeing support, information about our occupational health service that we provide, our employee assistance programme, Care First, a one-stop shop for health, safety and wellbeing. So that's what we're going to look to create between now and the end of the year.
And it's basically then, as you said, one-stop shop for people or for staff to find information on matters that relate to their health and well-being, yeah?
Yes, and how their employer can support them as well. So there'll be lots of signposting in there to external organisations. We might reference some of our policies in there as well. But it will be one central home, and we'll be confident then that if staff are looking for extra support, or if a manager needs to provide something to an employee, that's the one home where everything will be and nothing will be missed. Right.
That's not interactive though, is it?
It's not a two-way offer, no. It's just a, like I say, a brochure, a magazine where every signposting will be in there, and it will take you on to other signposted areas if you need it. There might be a clickable link whereby if you need a stress referral, for example, to be looked at by our health and safety team, you might be able to go straight in and make the referral through that. Yes, so that would be a direct request. But it's not a training brochure in terms of giving you interactive training, no.
And when will that be ready?
Our health and safety team are very stretched at the moment because they're working on still so much of the reactive COVID work, but we hope to have that done by the end of I'd like to have it done by Christmas, but it may be the other side of the new year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Micdad. Councillor Ferris, have you got any more questions, please?
Afraid not, Chairman. I think that's me largely done.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, if I could thank Rhys Cornwall, who's our Head of People and Business Change, and Rachel Davis, HR and OD Manager, thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your attendance, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, committee.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. Can I call on you now, Neil, to come back in, please?
Thanks very much, Chair. Yep, now's just a time for us just to collate some comments and conclusions on the information that the committee have just received. Was you happy with the information from the report that you received? Was there any further information that you were looking for as well? Because what we'd do, we would take on this information and we would send it back to Rhys and Rachel for feedback.
Charles or Micdad?
Yeah, I'll be happy, to sort of, we've got a recorded record here for that, and I'm hoping Neil has captured sort of, the main issues. I would like us to just emphasize that the communication loop, if you like, should include the trade unions and, staff representatives, that sort of thing.
Can I keep coming in when you say that. I agree with that entirely. I just worry that we've gone through a period with COVID where people have had to do things which are different, act on the spur, so to speak, make decisions which have all been in the best interest of all concerned. But when we get back to some sort of normality and stability, we mustn't forget that the employees have got working conditions, they've got representation. Any huge changes, and some of these would be huge changes if followed through, need to be dealt with in the normal fashion through the normal channels. We mustn't get carried away. You know, managers are enthused, great. They've helped us through COVID, great. But some of the things that may have been done are because staff, employees have been flexible, very flexible. You know, they've moved from one regime in the civic centre to another to support different sections and different areas. You know, you mustn't not take advantage of that. We must relook at all that if that's the right thing and get back to some normality. Just a general worry I've got. And I'm sorry I hogged it then. Victor, you mentioned trade union, that's the way to do it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, perhaps another point, if we're going to have another report like that in the future, Chair, I think to have those graphs, which I find very useful, you know, they sum up sort of feeling of staff about things. It would be good for them to record or to show sort of, you know, the average or the size of the survey that led to those. So that, you know, we know really how representative those results are, because I mean, I'm very pleased to see them, but you know, I'd like to know really how comprehensive they are, really how wide representation it is, really. So perhaps if we could make recommendation to that effect.
Yeah.
Future reports, that would be good, I think.
Yeah, good. Charles, anything from you?
The comment about survey fatigue is something that we should keep at the back of our minds. There's only so much you can get out of people. I think really it's you know, it's just something you've got to contend with, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there were two things that were mentioned by both speakers at one time. On the attendance policy was referred to, the absence policy was referred to, and that there may be future changes and they'll roll out another program. I mean, things like that, fine, but they need to be discussed and dealt with in the proper channels and in the proper way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are two things that I noted. Okay. Back to you, Neil. Are we making good progress?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks very much. I've also just noted then that Rhys advised that he would provide the specific survey numbers to the committee. So I'll log that as well. And when Rhys sends over the information, I'll send it to the committee.
Okay.
Yeah, good. We need to consider anything else, Neil?
Not unless there's any other comments or recommendations that the committee would want to make. If not, we can move on to the forward work programme, Chair.
Okay, if Dad happy with that, Charles happy with that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
We move on now then to the forward work programme and back from some help from you, Neil.
Thanks very much, Chair. So in the agenda, we were supposed the next two meetings are both in November. It would be the mid-year performance reviews. So as normal at this time, we would have heads of service and the cabinet members attend for the two meetings. The first meeting was due to be held, sorry, just waiting for this to load up. On the Monday, the 1st of November, we were due to have People and Business Change and Law and Regulations attending. That would be Gareth Price, Rhys Cornwall, and the two cabinet members, Councillor Truman and Councillor Mayer. Then on the 15th of November, we were due to have Finance, Regeneration and City Services. We had been requested by officers if we could move the meetings slightly later to allow the heads of service and service areas to give them more up-to-date information. So I've discussed this with the chair and hopefully we'll be able to have it agreed by the committee that we move the Monday the 1st meeting to Monday the 15th, and the Monday the 15th meeting to Monday the 29th. So that way we'll be able to get everyone in attendance for that, and we'll have the most information up to date. Also, is just to raise to the committee as well that today we were supposed to be having another agenda item, the economic growth regeneration updates. We had to move that to December. Again, it's one of those situations where the head of service, Tracy Brooks, requested we move it because we'll have more relevant and up-to-date information. So it was originally requested to be moved to the 6th of December. However, if the committee agreed to move the 2 mid-year performance reviews meeting, that would mean that we would move that meeting to the 13th of December. So if that's okay with the committee chair, we can organise the changes and send out the appointments.
I think the easiest thing is to say yes.
sorry for information overload then. Yeah. If you're happy to go ahead, yeah, I'll make the changes.
So Neil, can I, so basically you're saying the 1st of November moves to the 15th.
Yes.
The 15th moved to the 29th.
Yes.
And then the economic growth strategy. Now I didn't get this. Is it the 6th or the 13th?
That would be the 13th of December, Councillor.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm happy with that, Chair. You know, as things stand now anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something to put in the diary. Thank you.
Yeah.
And perhaps
you will issue the invitation, Neil, won't you?
I'm sorry, Councillor?
You will issue the invitation, you know, the calendar invitation.
Oh, yes, definitely. I'll send out the calendar invite shortly, and then within a couple of weeks of the meetings, I'll send out the Teams invitations as well.
Yeah. The sooner you inform the absent committee members today, the better, perhaps. Yeah.
Definitely. I'll make sure that everyone knows by tomorrow, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
These are all 3:30 starts. Are they, Neil?
They are, Councillor, yes.
3:30.
I'll be busy. Busy month.
I'd like to thank on behalf of the council my 2 very cooperative fellow committee members.
Yeah,
I think achieved the
yeah.
date.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, to be honest, it's hard when it's just the 3 of you as well, you know, because that's why you need more members. Anyway,
we need a few more to hide behind, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, over to you. Put him down.
What else could I do?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for both of you for attending and giving of your time. Neil, thank you very much for making sure that we got through, or I got through this meeting. And I'll wish you all farewell now. Is that it, Neil?
Yep, that's everything. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, committee. I'm just going to end in the meeting now.
Right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.